Okay, so the British held on to Florida until what year? Anybody know? Into the Revolutionary War. At the end of the Revolutionary War, British are the losers, the Spanish come back. They take Florida again, and they hold Florida for 40 years. It will not become United States until 1821. That's when it's a territory, and there's our first governor right there, Andrew Jackson. Named Jacksonville after him, of course. And earlier on, before this time of Florida becoming a territory of the United States, it's Spanish. And a great war breaks out with the Creeks in Georgia and Alabama. Some of the Creeks want to go back to live in the old ways of the ancient ones. Some of the Creeks want to continue trading on with the Americans and have slaves and live a plantation type life. So there's a great division. The ones that want to go back to the old way are more full-bloods. The ones that are wanting to live this more modern way are mixed. They've been mixing for many, many years. And you're going to see that in some of my talk here, and some of the people I talked to you about, like Oceola. He's a mixed blood. Okay? So this war breaks out, and when American forts get burned and destroyed during the war, they send Jackson, they send General Coffee, General Claiborne, General Floyd from Mississippi, from Georgia, from Tennessee. All the armies come, and they attack the Creeks. The last big battle is called Horseshoe Bend, which is a place on the river of the Tallapoosa that makes a big horseshoe, and the Creeks have built a fort there. Jackson's army comes to attack with the help of the Cherokees and the Choctaws, which were kind of enemies of the Creeks at that time, and so they help Jackson's army. Anyways, the Creeks are defeated, and the survivors of this defeat that don't get captured are going to run away to Spanish Florida. And they're going to be part of this great number of Creeks that migrate and become Seminoles. Okay? And by this time, you can see our clothing is changing. A lot of slaves. Let's see, a pointer here. This guy here is obviously black. And you can see the clothing here by this period is cloth. Deerskin leggings like I'm wearing here. A lot of beadwork. This is all bead stuff. We love that shiny. That's silver. There's a like a king crown there. Jackson's defeat on the Creeks allows runaways to come to Florida, and he'll pursue them, and this will turn into a war called the First Seminole War. And their villages mostly are up in the Panhandle at the time, and they capture a chief, which was one of the main chiefs of the Creek Wars, and they hang him by the neck at Fort St. Mark's, and his name is Hillis Haya. He's known as Mad Medicine. His daughter is Millie Francis, who just saved the life of a soldier, kind of like Pocahontas' story, and saved his life. And later that soldier turns on them and is part of a group that tricked the old chief. They put up a British flag on the American vessel, and the natives thought that was their friend, so they took their canoes out to this ship that they thought were their buddies, but it was Jackson's boats that tricked them. So that's how they captured the old chief. But Millie Francis watches her father being hung from the other shoreline, and supposedly that is her that's on our state flag. The native girl that's dropping flowers into the water. That's her story. Jackson will go on to fight the Seminoles here in Florida, burn their villages, and drive them right into central Florida, right here into this area here. They'll come down this way more. Later, he'll go on to be the president because he's a great Indian fighter, and he'll win very easily. And when he becomes president, he signs a removal act to move all native people east of the Mississippi River and take them out west to reservations. Today we call that land Oklahoma. But back then it was Arkansas territory, and that's where they were moving all the tribes to. And so tribes up north that had once lived up in the like New York, Pennsylvania areas, they moved already out to Indiana areas and lived and established their new settlements. Now they've got to get moved again. So this includes a lot of native people in the east. It caused a lot of tribes to go to war, and some tribes surrender and give up and will walk the Trail of Tears. Some tribes will say, you know what, we're going to stay here and we're going to fight to the bitter end. And that's the Seminoles. And so this is what the soldiers look like of that era. You can see he's got a big old X marks the spot where to aim. And that big hat he's got on, that's called a forge hat. If they were out in the wilderness and didn't have bucket, that's a bucket. That's a feed trough for your horse. You can put that over his neck, feed him. You can gather water out of the creeks and carry it back to camp. You can gather, it's a forge cap. The gun he's got there is a musket. The muskets were nowhere near as accurate as a rifle. A rifle had rifling, makes the ball spin, much more accurate. The Seminole guns were more rifles because they had been trading with the Spanish guns, the English guns even earlier on, and by the American period, they were still getting guns from the Spanish because the Spanish were more than welcome to give them guns. And so going to Cuba in boats and canoes was common for slaves to escape for one thing, but also to trade. And so that was going on a lot. So the guns of the natives were a little different than the guns of the soldiers. There's Oceola. This is going to be a boy in Alabama named Billy Powell. And during the Great Creek Indian Wars with Jackson, he'll be a refugee, a runaway to Florida. He'll join up with his uncle, who was named Peter McQueen, ironically. He came down to Florida with him and his mother. His father's out of the picture, who was a white man. His name is Billy Powell. He'll get the name Oceola at about 15 years old when the boy goes through a manhood ceremony. In the native world, you go through this manhood ceremony, now you're a warrior. Now your parents will answer for you. Now you're given a warrior name. And because he drank the most of the black drink, the Yopon Holly that's for sale there, and that was a drink of warriors because it was full of caffeine, and before battle we'd always drink lots of it. And that was what we called that. Aussie. Say that. Aussie. That's how you say tea in the Muskogee language. Aussie. And Yahola. Yahola means to yell. Because when you drank the black drink, the warriors would yell out their war yell, their loudest war screams. And because he drank the most of the black drink, and he gave the loudest war yell, the medicine people in charge of the ceremony gave him that as his warrior name. Aussie Yahola. And that was the way it was said back then. Today, of course, we say a lot different. And so this is him. This is a famous Oceola. And he's born actually in Alabama, Georgia, a line somewhere in that area, probably Alabama. And he comes here at the age of about 12, 15 as a refugee, runaway. He becomes a warrior. And he grows up around Silver Springs today, that area. And there was a fort there called Fort King. That was the Indian Agency. Not too much earlier, when the United States took over Florida, they required the Seminoles to make a pact, a treaty. It's called the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. And it confined them to a reservation land. They couldn't go to the coasts. They couldn't go beyond the borders. If they did, they could be arrested. And it's because there was a lot of issues going on with the white areas and the native areas and cattle being from one place to the other. And by the way, you heard me say that chief's name, Cowkeeper, earlier? Why do you think they called him that? He had over 1,000 head of horses and cattle. So many he couldn't even count. And he had got them from the Spanish when they left Florida to the British. They didn't give the British their cows. They just turned them loose. And him being the chief that had lived in that area, he rounded them all up. And that was his wealth. That was his money. He didn't need the deer skins. He had cows and horses. And he'd run them across Palatka, which means crossing. That's where they would cross at to get to St. Augustine with their animals. That was the best place to cross the St. John's because it's very narrow and it's shallow there. And so they would ford the animals across there. Another place that was a ford was Calford. Anybody know where that is? It's today Jacksonville. Originally it was called Calford. And that was where they forded cattle across the St. John's. But that was what the cowkeeper did. He sold them cattle all the time. Anyways, that's how we got the guns. That's how we got the cloth and the metal tools and the things of Europeans. Osceola will grow up around Fort King, Silver Springs, and he'll grow up learning the ways of the soldiers because he sees them every day as a child, probably, in around that fort. He probably spoke English. He may not have chose to do it all the time. Ostrich feathers were very common in that time. That's what he's wearing there. This turban you see looks like the one I have is just a wrap, silk wrap. But later in the war, this is a way we can carry a hammock. They make them bigger, and they make them out of thin materials. It can be a mosquito netting, or it can be a hammock to sleep up off the ground at night. He has a powder horn for his musket there, his rifle. And those are moccasins like I'm wearing. Leggings, button-up leggings. Those are made of wool. And you see the shinies he's got on his chest. What is that? Anybody know?
Gorget.
Exactly. And that goes way back. The word French for protector of the neck. And it goes back to European knighthood days, the piece of armor worn underneath a helmet. And by the time of the Revolutionary War era, French and Indian War era, 18th century, the gorget is a symbol of an officer. If you're wearing the gorget and it's got the marking of the country you're with, the British Crown or the French fleur-de-lis, they would know who you are. You're an officer if you're wearing a gorget. So aim for the gorget. Anyways, the natives loved shinies ever since early tribes, when they got copper nuggets from tribes far away, and they pounded them out, made ear spools, chest pieces, headdress pieces. So we loved the shinies and always did. And so by this era, the gorgets you see there were made out of coins that they would pound out and make them, and just loved to wear the shinies.